I'm Stephanie Rozzo. Welcome to Nature Sketch Create's Green Sea Turtle instructional video. In this video I'll be showing you how to paint a green sea turtle by using Nature Sketch Create's step-by-step painting instructions. Help support this tiny business by clicking the like button, subscribing to this channel, and checking out naturesketchcreate.com. First, collect all your materials and make sure they're ready to go. Remember, this is just a sketch. Take your time, relax, and don't get too caught up if you think you may have made a mistake. Let's get started. Step 1, transfer the image to the watercolor paper. So go ahead and tape your transfer image to the back of the watercolor paper. Make sure you don't cover up anything you plan to transfer. The hole punch lines are optional, as well as the common name and the scientific name. And then go ahead and place the graphite transfer paper dark side down, light side up on top of the watercolor paper, and just gently press that to make it flat. And make sure you don't put too much pressure on any one spot. That will cause some of that graphite to transfer to your paper. And you may not want that. If you do, it's totally fine. It's gonna add an interesting look to your painting and make it perfectly imperfect. So go ahead and choose a spot. It doesn't really matter where, and just trace right over it using a medium pressure. And it doesn't have to be exact. You can, if you get outside of the lines, inside or outside, it's totally fine. So after you've transferred the line, go ahead and flip it up to check it. Just hold it down gently and check that line actually transferred and that you can see it. You just want to be able to see it at the end so you can redraw it. And then you can start adding the rest. And you can flip it up and down just like this, like a flip book, to check to see what lines you've added at any point if you get kind of lost. Your finger can also be a nice guide to keep track of which dots you've already transferred these scales. And I recommend drawing the outside of those scales, not the whole entire inside. And this is meant to be a relaxing activity, so hopefully you put on a podcast or an audiobook or some music or sketch outside. And just kind of relax and transfer all of those lines. And you can stop this at any point if you get interrupted or you run out of time. You can always come back to it later. And you can do that at any step of the painting process. So go ahead and go throughout and transfer the lines. So if you like, you can transfer the common name and the scientific name by tracing the inside of the common name, since my pencil tip is a little bit smaller than the type itself. And then just tracing right over to transfer the scientific name. And these are optional, so you don't have to do that. In fact, everything is optional. This is your sketch. So when you have all the lines transferred, go ahead and take out the graphite transfer paper, and this can be reused over and over and over. So save that to the side for future use. And then remove the tape from the back of the watercolor paper. And then also remove it from your transfer image. Not much paper stuck to the tape, so I feel like I could reuse this. If you had a lot of paper remain on the tape that kind of stuck to it after you removed it, go ahead and compost it, or you can throw it in the trash, I guess. And save your transfer image to protect your painting while you're creating it. and take your kneaded eraser, just kind of knead it a bit to get a light gray spot, and take that and you can either rub it over any unwanted graphite transfer marks, some of them stay behind, or you can just lighten some marks by just lightly dabbing it on top of a space. Just make sure you, after dabbing it, you knead it a bit to get a clean spot so you don't transfer unwanted marks, unless that's something you're wanting to have in your image. And when you feel this is ready, then you can go ahead and move on to step 2 to add some paint. Step 2, painting the wettest, lightest turtle yellow green. So first you want to mix the turtle yellow green by taking 2H gamboge, and we'll want 4 drops. 1, 2, 3, 4. You may want to protect your painting just in case. And 1 drop of the 33H raw umber. Shake that up as well. Make sure that pigment is mixed in. 1 drop. And release a little bit of water from your water brush and add it while you mix it. And you can do that by just pressing gently on the barrel. And if you have a regular paintbrush, you can just pick up a little bit of water from your cup and then add it straight to the palette. You do not want to mix colors on your paper. So go ahead and clean off your brush, and then pick up a little bit of that, take it to the side and add a bunch of water to it. Dab it on your towel and then test it on your paper. And it still looks pretty dark, so I'm going to take a little bit of that to the side, and I'm going to add even more water to it. Dab it off on my towel and test it out. And that looks good, nice barely there color. Pick some more up, dab it on your towel, and then go ahead and add it to your painting. And you're going to start on any side or adding it to the entire turtle. So I would treat each one of these areas as a single space, picking up a little paint when you need it, and then just painting through that. Littler spaces are a little bit easier than one large space to keep a consistent wash of watercolor. Pick up a little bit more, dab it off on your towel, and then just kind of work on one space at a time and moving to the next one when you're ready. So if you get interrupted, you could just stop right there and come back to this. You can always revive your paint by adding a little bit of water to it. So I'm picking up more paint whenever I need it and just adding it. I'm starting on one side and moving to the other so that I don't get my hand in it and while it's wet. Working in each space one at a time, just kind of filling it in. Like I would use a colored pencil or a crayon, just kind of moving it over that space to apply the color. Picking up more whenever it starts to get a little light or too dry. So if the paint doesn't feel like it's moving on the paper. So you can see it got a little lighter and a little drier, it wasn't moving very well. So I started at the beginning of that space, and then I'm just going to move it to the other side. And I still have a pretty good amount, so I'm going to go ahead and fill that in before I pick up more paint. Picking up more paint again and adding this. I'm not worrying too much if I get any of the paint outside of the lines. Just makes it perfectly imperfect. And just take it, this flipper here is just one big shape. I'm just starting on one end and working to the other. So kind of pulling the paint over the space, kind of like if you had a crayon, you're just pulling it right over a marker, just pulling it right over the space. It's a lot like a marker, just the color runs out every once in a while. So go ahead and clean your brush off on your towel. Let this dry and move on to step 3. Step 3, paint in turtle mahogany and turtle yellow green. So first you want to mix the turtle mahogany by taking the red oxide, shake it up to make sure it's well mixed so you get the right color in your palette. Add 5 drops, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 33H raw umber, 3 drops, 1, 2, 3, and gamboge 2H. I'm gonna have 1 drop of that. You can add some water and mix it up a little bit. Clean it off on your towel. And then take just a little bit of it to the side, add a bunch of water, and test it out on your paper. And then take that, you might want it just a little darker, and test it out again. That looks better. And then take that and add it to all of the spots and scales on the skin. So all of their scales and spots. I made a tiny mistake there. I put the color into the tail, so I just wiped it off really quick, making sure that I wiped into this other area, not the white area, so that I can just basically picked up the color with my finger. And I'm just going to add it to all these spots. And if you need a finer tip, you can just roll your brush on your towel, just the tip, very gently, to help create that tip. And you can pick up more color whenever you need it. And don't worry about getting it exactly in the right spot. Just an approximation of where that color goes. This is just a sketch. Doesn't need to be exact. You also want to use it to add a sunburst pattern, kind of go over these lines. They don't have to be exact. You can feel free to be creative with it, but just kind of add it in and use these lines as a guide. And do that to all of the shell scoots. Just want to make sure you preserve some of that color underneath, so you don't want to paint in the entire space. Just add some lines. And when you've added all the turtle mahogany, you'll want to paint in the dry dark turtle green, and you want to let this dry. Mine is already dry, because I haven't added a lot of water in my paint to my paper. So it's ready to go. But if you added a lot of water, you'll want to wait for it to dry before adding more paint. So clean off your brush. Go ahead and paint in the dry dark turtle yellow green B, so it's the medium color. We already have that here. You can test it out again and make sure it's the right color. Looks pretty good to me. So I'm gonna pick up a little bit more, dab it off on my towel. And like you see in step 3's image, you can add it to the flippers. Just adds kind of a highlight. And you might be able to see it a little bit better in your final reference image. There's a nice highlight on the edges of these flippers with this color, and pick up a little bit more whenever you need it. And then there's a little highlight on the neck, here on the chin, neck here, so it's the lower part of the head, and then this flipper here as well. And then you also just go ahead and add it again to all of these scoots like you did with your turtle mahogany, and just kind of adding it in. It doesn't need to be in the same place as mahogany. It's actually good to have it slightly different. Just kind of add it in without thinking too much about it. Just add some lines and color that. Just kind of following those lines, just freely just letting your brush do what you want it to do or what it wants to do, not worrying too much, just getting the paint on there, just letting it flow. Just make sure you don't cover up too much of any of the mahogany or too much of the lighter yellow-green underneath. And you can add some to the edges here too, if you have big white spots like I do, or big light yellow-green spots like I did. And then clean off your brush, and you can move on to step 4. Step 4, paint in the turtle mahogany. So we're going to add the dry dark turtle mahogany this time, and a scribble line motion. And we're going to add it and add a little bit more water to this and test it out on my paper. Make sure it's not too dark. It looks good. And feel free to be really creative when adding this to the shell scoots. This is the part that you really can see. You add it in lines and kind of create your own pattern about how dark you want the little circles at the bottom of the sunburst to be, about how much darkness and how much lightness you want to show underneath or have on top. So this is up to you. Just try to stay in the direction of those lines and just kind of fill it in. Turtles' shell scoots vary a lot. They just have this sunburst pattern, which is pretty consistent. But otherwise, you can have some fun leaving it really light or making it really dark. It's up to you. Every time I paint, my painting turns out just a little bit different based on my mood or just how I'm feeling that day, what's going on around me. So your painting shouldn't look exactly like the example, and my painting never does. Because every time I feel different. Or my watercolor might be a little drier, or the color might be a little darker or a little lighter. Just maybe my water brush is working differently, and that's all great because it makes the painting more unique. It's your unique image. No two are the same. When you have the shell scoots colored in, you can go ahead and add the color to the spots or scales as well. Again, you don't have to be exact. I like to start, just kind of aim for the center and then move out to the outer edges of the spots. And if the spots are really small, I just kind of dab it. And it doesn't need to cover the entire thing. In fact, that adds a little bit more of a contrast. And pick up paint whenever you need it. Make sure not to color in that tail. And if you do, that's okay. It just turns into a spot and the turtle's tail is just really short. If you have too much water or color, just dab your brush off onto your towel and then you can move forward. Once you have all of that turtle mahogany added, go ahead and clean off your brush, let this dry, and move on to step 5. Paint in turtle brown and turtle yellow green. So first you want to mix the turtle brown, which is just the 33H raw umber with some water added to it. So we have 33H raw umber. Shake up your bottle to make sure the pigment is well mixed again. And take a couple drops just so we have enough paint to work with. And I'm just going to pick up a little bit of that on the tip and add it to the side with some water. I'm going to add a little bit more. Wasn't really enough. And pick it up after cleaning off my brush on my towel and check it on my paper. And that looks more like the wet light color, which we'll use later. So maybe I do need this darker color. Add just a tiny bit of water to it and test it out. That looks much better. And I'll pick up a little bit more, dab it on my towel, and then I'm going to add it again the same way I did in step 4. I'm going to add it to the shell here, not being super exact. Be creative and add that pattern. Just try to let some of this undercolors show. So you'll start some, kind of add it in, kind of randomly wherever you like, but you still can see some of the other colors. If you want it to be super dark and you just want to fill it in with this brown color, that's totally fine too. Just try to stay in the direction of the sunburst, so these transfer lines you have here. Use those as your guide as far as the direction, but it's up to you how dark or light you want to leave it. And you'll also want to, like we did in step 4, add it to these spots and scales again. And just make sure you avoid that little tail. So I'm putting that in there so I remember. And don't forget to pick up more paint whenever you need it. And if you need to put more paint into your palette, that's fine at any time as well. It's fun to let the watercolor do what it wants to do. Just kind of adding some and then moving it around gently. And I am letting some of that color show through underneath. And use your final reference image whenever you need it to help you figure out where you should put those spots for where these scales are. A lot of my color is mixed with the water, so I'm going to add a little bit more. It's not quite dark enough. Pick up that, test it out, make sure it's not too dark. Make sure it has a little bit of water added so it moves on your paper, or it's added to the palette, not your paper. Once you have all of that turtle brown added, go ahead and clean off your brush and start to add the driest, darkest turtle yellow green. You'll want to make sure that it is dry. If you added too much water to your paint, you may need to wait a little bit longer. You can check by just kind of dabbing your finger to check. And as you can see, I opted to have a lot less of that dark color in here. I'm going for more of a lighter turtle shell this time. And since mine is all dry, I'm gonna go ahead and pick up that driest, darkest turtle yellow green, adding just a little bit of water because it's been sitting there for a while, dabbing it off on my towel, testing it on my paper, looks great, and then adding it to the shell to add highlight, so throughout these sunbursts, to the flippers, like you see in step 5's image, and the neck and the head as well. So go ahead and add that throughout. Feel free to be creative as far as how much or how little you add to that shell and where that placement is. Just make sure to preserve some of those colors underneath like we did before, and to keep it in a similar direction, those lines. If you want to add a lot of highlights, you can, kind of like I just did. Changing this picture up just a little bit this time. And when you have all of that turtle yellow green added, go ahead and clean off your brush, let this dry, and move on to step 6. Step 6, paint in turtle mahogany and turtle brown. So I want to paint in this driest, darkest turtle mahogany again. This time we're just adding it on top to create a little bit more of a highlight. So just kind of sparingly in the direction, and again, be creative and add as little or as much as you feel like adding to your turtle shell. Next, you want to add in the wettest, lightest turtle brown after you've cleaned off your brush. And so you want to take some of that brown color, probably to the side, and add some water to it. A little bit more. And test it out on your paper. It's pretty light and wet. Let me take a little bit more. Test it out again. That looks good. I'm going to take a little bit of that, dab it on my towel, and then I'm just going to add it to the flipper's neck and head to add a little bit of shadow to the skin, like you see in step 6's image and in the file reference image. So kind of take it over that area, and I'll just add a little bit of a shadow. It's very similar to the spaces you added the highlights. When you have all of the color added, go ahead and clean off your brush, let this dry, and move on to step 7. Step 7, add ink lines. So use the 005 black micron to redraw the lines you transferred in step 1, except for the shell pattern lines and the spots or scales. You want to outline the common name and write in the scientific name like you see in 7A and the final reference image. So go ahead and go throughout and redraw those lines. If there are any areas where you got a lot of paint outside the lines, you can stick with the original lines, or you can just extend the line outside of where that paint ends. For the eye, in order to reserve that small white spot, I work on the outside and then just kind of fill in towards it. And you can wait to do that with the 01 micron if you want. or fill it in with this tiny micron. Sometimes I get a little anxious and decide to do the eye right away. I like eyes being done. Once you have all the 0.05 black micron lines added, go ahead and move on to the 0.1 black micron. You'll want to use it to write in the scientific name, thicken some of the lines, including the ones on the head, flippers, shell, and under the eye. And if you didn't do the inside of the eye yet, do that now. And you refer to your step 7A and your final reference image for placement. When you have all the 0.1 micron lines added, go ahead and move on to adding the 0.8 black micron lines. So you want to use them to fill in the common name here, to thicken some of the lines as you see in 7B and your final reference image. So the outside of the shell from the tail to the neck on the turtle's right side here, and both flippers on the turtle's right side, this one and this one, and the head, the neck, and parts of the flippers on the turtle's left side. So you can see in your final reference image where those lines are a little bit thicker, and you'll leave some of the areas a little thinner. So go ahead and go through and add those. Make sure to protect your image from any wet ink. This ink can smudge, especially this thicker line here. I want this tail to stick out, so I'm just going to draw a little line underneath it. And then I'm going to start here and just take this line all the way across. So go ahead and add all those lines. You are done. Great job, and keep practicing. If you'd like to add more ink or more paint, you can do that. Just make sure you let it dry in between and don't work on it too long. This is just a sketch. It's gonna look great no matter what. Next, you have some options of what to do with this painting. You can punch holes in it and add it to your sketchbook. You can gift it, frame it. Also, make sure to share it somehow so we can see it. You can share it to our Facebook fan art page, or you can have it featured on our social media by using the hashtag #NatureCreateArt. Thank you for joining me. I hope you had fun, learned something, and had a chance to relax a little. Make sure to check out the Nature Sketch Crate website for future crates, and sign up for our newsletter for regular updates.